Hi, my name is Aiden Fitzpatrick, and this is my reading presentation project for English 205. I'd like to talk about Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, specifically Chapter 8, titled All God's Children. This chapter is one of the more emotional parts of the book. It focuses on several juvenile court cases involving young people of color who are unfairly sentenced through a combination of unforgiving laws, racism, and ignorance. First, we have the story of Trina Garnett. She was raised in a poor area of Pennsylvania. Her father regularly abused her, and when she couldn't take it anymore, she left to live on the streets. This is where she developed mental issues from her trauma. One night, she entered the house of two boys she knew. To find her way to their room, she lit a match, which caused the house to catch fire, therefore killing the two boys. Due to an unforgiving Pennsylvania law, the judge was not allowed to take into consideration Trina's age, mental health, poverty, or the abuses she suffered. He was forced to convict her of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. At 13 years old, Ian Manuel attempted to rob a Florida couple with his friends. When one resisted, Ian shot her in the cheek with a handgun. In court, Ian's lawyer encouraged him to plead guilty without giving Ian the knowledge that this plea would lead to life in prison. His plea was accepted by the judge, who then sentenced him to life without parole. The judge condemned him for living on the streets and having no parental supervision. Antonio Nuez grew up in an area of Los Angeles known for gang violence. One night when he was riding his bike, he was shot in the stomach. His brother came to his aid, but was shot in the head and killed. After that, Antonio moved to his relatives in Las Vegas, where he thrived, but the parole office demanded that he move back to LA because of his previous crimes. In LA, he went to a party where two men pressured him into being an accomplice in a robbery. During a car chase, Antonio shot at two unknowingly undercover cops and his car crashed. Nobody was injured. Antonio was charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempting to kill cops. He was sentenced to life in prison until death. The last of the story centers around George Stinney. He was a 14-year-old African-American boy who was accused of murdering two white girls based on a false testimony. During his trial, the courtroom was packed with white people. African Americans were not allowed to enter. George's attorney was not suited for the case and never called any witnesses. After the verdict, the lawyer did not appeal the case because George's family, quote, could not afford it. The all-white jury quickly reached a decision and the judge sentenced him to death. I wanted to analyze two significant passages from this chapter, which relate to the topic of blind ignorance and racism in the justice system. Quote, George's white court-appointed attorney, a tax lawyer with political aspirations, called no witnesses. The prosecution's only evidence was the sheriff's testimony regarding George's alleged confession. The trial was over in a few hours. George stood no chance in his trial. This passage shows that the white community was already set on condemning him for a crime which he so obviously did not commit. The fact that the trial only lasted a few hours clearly shows that there was no other option for George than being fully convicted. This is the extent that racist bigots will go to circumvent the justice system in the name of white supremacy. This passage is from Antonio's story. Quote, the Orange County judge sentenced Antonio to imprisonment until death, asserting that he was a dangerous gang member who could never change or be rehabilitated, despite the difficult background and the absence of any significant criminal history. End quote. Antonio was convicted because he was a, quote, dangerous gang member, despite having no serious prior offenses. The judge labeled Antonio as so without any consideration to his background and the circumstances of his upbringing. We learned that he was actually doing very well when he left to Las Vegas. However, the trauma associated with returning to the place his brother was killed caused him to make the bad decisions that led to his crime. The judge did not take any of this into account and had prejudged him as a violent gang member. Antonio stood no chance. This brings to light that certainly racial prejudices can affect judicial decisions. From an article by the ACLU, I learned that people of color are disproportionately sentenced to death. The article also mentions the practice of shuffling out black jurors from the courts and replacing them with white ones. The article furthers the statement that people are often convicted harshly based solely on their race, for children and adults too. From an article by edchange.org, I learned that racism and prejudice stem from ignorance. Prejudice occurs most often against people that are different from us. It is an almost complete lack of knowledge and empathy for others. Both the judges in George's and Antonio cases exhibited prejudice towards them because they were not white. It probably would have been a different story if they were. So this begs the question, what can we do? We are facing a time of rapid change in our society. I believe the most important thing we can do is educate. We must change the narrative to understand that everyone is the same no matter your race. Once people can empathize with each other, there will be no reason for hatred and racism. We can use our privilege for good by speaking out against racism. We can lobby our government to alter cruel and unforgiving laws, and, more simply, we can contribute our time and money to organizations. Ignoring the atrocities of our world is the same as siding with the oppressors. We can all be active in changing our future. These are hopeful times, and it starts with us. Thank you.